Hello, good morning to everyone on the US West Coast that's joining us. Good evening to anyone in India, and I guess good afternoon to everyone else in between. My name is Gordon Smith. I'm the airlines editor at Skift, and we are joined for this LinkedIn Live by Jay Shabbat, senior analyst. Hey, Jay, how's it going? Try one more time again with your mute off, Jay. There we are.
No one's ever done that before.
How's it
I'm
going,
good,
Jay?
Gordon. How are you?
Doing very, very well. Just a little bit of context for anyone joining us on LinkedIn Live. We are going to be doing a live taping of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. So this is just a brief introduction, saying hello to everyone on LinkedIn. We will start the recording of the podcast proper in just a moment, but there will be an opportunity for a Q&A with Jay and myself at the very end. So if you've got any questions about the podcast, how we make the podcast, or more broadly about the industry, get those in via the chat panel, which I believe is just somewhere along here. And yeah, the podcast, as usual, will be around 25, 30 minutes plus that Q&A. So we should be wrapped up just after 1:30. But with no further ado, we will get stuck into the podcast proper. So producer Monica, if you're ready, press that big record button, because here we go for our first ever live taping of the Airline Weekly Lounge. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Gordon Smith. And this week, I'm joined by co-host Jay Shabbat. In this week's special episode, we're discussing the biggest topics and themes ahead of the Skift Aviation Forum. Hey, Jay, how's it going?
Wait a minute, Gordon. I was under the assumption here, you told me that we were talking about the election today. You mentioned airlines.
There is a lot of controversy in the airline sector. I think that's enough. I don't think we need to stumble into politics. Yeah, there's enough big egos and dramas and everything else.
Yeah, we'll stick with airlines. In fact, the election is probably the one thing that we absolutely will not talk about. Everything
politics
else is fair game.
Absolutely.
Everything else is fair game. Okay.
Absolutely. So anyone that's joining us in our traditional podcast format, we're actually recording this right now on LinkedIn Live on Wednesday, 30th of October. And Jay, I know we had our face-to-face recording at the Skift Global Forum in New York City, but this is the first time we've done anything like this. So a little bit special.
Yeah. First time we're doing it on LinkedIn Live, and so it's a fun occasion.
It is indeed. So much to discuss, so let's crack on. We are going to be picking through some of the topics that will come up, I think, time and time again at the Skift Aviation Forum. If you're not already aware, where have you been? It is going to be on November 12th at the Stadler Hotel in Dallas, Texas, and that's going to be the Skift Aviation Forum. Go to live.skift.com, not right now, but at the end of the podcast for any information about tickets, agendas, speakers, and for all the important details. Jay, before we get stuck into our very high-tech game, I know we've got something high-tech. Do you want to share it with us?
Oh, well, we'll hold that. I just want to say a few words about the Dallas-Fort Worth market, if I may. Can I go ahead and do that?
Yes, but we will have, I think it's best described as an ultra low-cost carrier format for our next segment. We've taken inspiration
from Don't jump ahead,
the O'Leary book. I won't. It's very, very exciting. But yeah, Jay, tell us why
we're gonna have a game show. Right?
Yeah, not far off. Tell us why Dallas, in particular, is such a hot aviation market right now, and quite a decent place for us to be converging for the aviation forum. Because people might be thinking, all right, yeah, it's got a decent airport, and it's not a bad place to spend November to get out of the worst of the weather. But it is becoming increasingly relevant on the global airline scene. Tell us why.
I remember, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, by the way, it was actually pretty cold. We went there, surprising. I was expecting
really?
Texas in November would be pretty warm, and I remember, but who knows? I don't know. It's seasonably warm up where I am near Philadelphia, so who knows? So I just wanted to underscore the importance of the DFW market to airlines. I just want everybody to appreciate the enormity of it. And I do have some numbers to share with you. And these are from the U.S. Census. So I'm looking at, this is 2023 data for population. So we're looking at metro areas. It's the city. It's all these surrounding suburbs. And if you look at the top three largest metros in the U.S., we have New York number one by far. That's about 19 million. Then you've got Los Angeles, about 13 million. Chicago's next, about 9 million. And then Dallas is right behind that at about 8 million. So number 4, Dallas Fort Worth metro area, the Metroplex they call it. And I don't know what demographers, I'm sure they have a prediction on this, but at some point pretty soon, I'd have to imagine Dallas is going to surpass Chicago. Because, I mean, if you look at during the 2010s, and I'll be very brief here, but so from 2010 to 2019, the United States population as a whole grew about 6%, whereas New York only grew about 2%, Los Angeles 3%, Chicago actually shrank a little bit, Dallas 19%. And that's if you look at, like top 25 places in the United States, that's pretty much close to the top, one of the fastest growing big cities in the United States, big metro areas in the United States. So it's absolutely an airport market, or an airline market that more and more airlines are paying attention to. It's growing very fast. And of course, it is a hub for America, and it's also the hometown for Southwest. So very important market.
Looking forward to getting there in person, Jay. Okay, no further ado, let's go to our super high-tech game, because we couldn't decide out of all of the amazing speakers we've got at the Skift Aviation Forum who we were going to discuss, what themes we were going to discuss. So Jay, I understand you've got an AI solution for us. Is that right?
Yeah, so we got some programmers in here, Gordon and I, and we built this sort of this big model to determine which airline we're going to be talking about today of the ones that are presenting. So here's my model. It's actually a baseball cap, one of my old ready baseball caps here. And what I'm going to do is this complicated little game show here. We also have these pieces of paper, and just kind of tore up a piece of scrap paper and divided it into about 10 different ones. And on each one, I wrote one of the organizations that are going to be speaking at, not all of them, but I think there's 10 in here. One of the organizations that are going to be speaking at the event. And I'm going to throw them into my trusty little hat here. I'm going to shake it up. Sorry about my...
there we go.
And I'm going to pick one.
I assume you don't have a glamorous assistant to come in and pick one up.
She's coming. Yeah, hang on. Okay. Let's see here. We got...
Okay, who got first?
The answer is IATA. Okay, IATA. So what do we got?
Big one to start.
Yeah.
Well,
so
Willie Walsh, the Director General of IATA.
Yeah.
He will be joining us.
Right. So IATA. So that'll be interesting. So I jotted down a few questions for each of these on, some of the questions that we might want to ask, in this case, Mr. Walsh. And one of them here is quite simply, if there was one regulation or law that you'd like to change, what would it be? And remember that IATA is kind of, you could think of them as the voice of the airline industry. So they, they're kind of almost lobbyists would be maybe the cruder term, but they're responsible for their job is to kind of advocate for the airlines before governments, and they do other things too, set standards for technology, things like that. It's a rather complex organization, but that would be one interesting thing to know from Willie Walsh is, what law or regulation would, if anything else, would it be a tax? Would it be some, infrastructure rule or whatever? What would that be? I'll mention just one other thing that's kind of on my mind, that will be on my mind when he's speaking is, I would like to know, if there were 3 issues that he had to rank as his most important as he's, going around advocating for the airline industry, what would they be? I'd have to imagine sustainability might be one, or taxes might be another. I'm curious to hear from him what that would be. So that's just a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, and one of the hottest topics, Jay, I don't know if you agree with this, but Willie's been relatively active in this area. He's not been afraid to speak up, as you might expect from the head of a trade body lobbying for airlines. But he's started to sort of seed the narrative of who is going to pay for the clean or cleaner energy transition. Because irrespective of whether you agree, that we should be moving to SAF or cleaner alternatives, and the speed at which we're doing that. Obviously, 2050 is the big net zero date in the diary. Everyone can agree that SAF in its current form is more expensive than traditional jet fuel. And there is going to be an emerging gulf between the prices we pay today for the traditional fuels and the cleaner alternatives. Willie's been pretty outspoken at saying airlines shouldn't necessarily pick up all of that, if any of that additional cost. It will inevitably be passed on to the passenger. Do you think we're heading in maybe the coming decade or even slightly before that, a situation where more and more airlines, I'm thinking of Lufthansa, that will pass on some sort of eco levy or SAF levy to match what's being required of them on a regulatory basis with the price differential?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost to a certain degree, it's not even a choice. It's more like, it's if the market allows, then yeah, maybe you can get away with it. But pricing is pricing. It's at a certain point, if you if you levy too many additional charges, then you're going to lose demand. So that's the airline industry, because it's so competitive, it's going to be it's difficult to get away with something like that. But yeah, there'll certainly be examples where they try, whether they call it and specifically an eco related charge or just simply raise prices. Now, the thing you always have to remember when you're talking about this subject is, the price of fuel determines airline cost conditions just so dramatically that if the higher fuel prices get, when we get to the point, we had this in 2022, we had this, if you go back to 2000, the early 2000s. You had a situation where the price of oil, the price of jet fuel got so expensive that the pressure to adopt these alternative fuels grew even more intense. Whereas now we have a situation where fuel prices are actually falling, and that pressure kind of comes off a little bit. At least the economic pressure. There's also political pressures and social pressures and things like that. So what happens in terms of the timing of the adoption of some of these, and I think that's still very much in flux, and it's going to depend on a lot of factors, including the price of traditional jet fuel.
Yeah, definitely. And another topic that I think will be really, really interesting to hear from Willie is technology, because he's been fairly outspoken about this. He said the onus that must be on tech companies for reliability. So this is obviously against the backdrop of the CrowdStrike chaos that we saw, particularly at Delta Airlines in July and early August this year. Obviously, lawsuits flying back and forth between the various parties there. But on CrowdStrike, he said, perhaps it's time the IT industry adopted similar levels of humility and transparency so that we can be ever more confident in the security and safety of our digitized world. So some interesting comments there that the safety and security standards that airlines and airports and that sort of ecosystem, the aviation ecosystem, hold themselves up to, should be matched by the tech side. Another topic as well is infrastructure constraints, which I know is a big one on Willie's agenda. He said, and I quote here, looking ahead, the continued strong demand growth signals that we could be fast approaching an infrastructure capacity crunch that would restrict connectivity and choice for passengers and businesses. And cynics could say, well, of course, the guy that's looking after the world's airlines is going to be lobbying for better infrastructure and everything else. But interesting to see just how much he will be talking about this, not just in the current tense, but as we move forward, because the skies are getting busier, airspace is pretty much, I'm trying to think, Jay, the skies certainly above parts of Europe, the routings have not been changed dramatically, since the 70s, maybe even the 60s, depending on where you are. So I'm going to be really interested to see, of all the topics that IATA can sort of lobby and shout about, to see where infrastructure comes in that.
That's a good one. Yeah, that is a hot topic for sure. And it kind of blends with the aircraft supply shortage as well, which is, a multi-year thing. So, I mean, infrastructure is even longer time horizon. But yeah, it's if you have all these constraints on airline growth, well, in one sense, it could be good for airline, revenues, maybe even airline profitability. But at the same time, you have to ask, is it good for economic growth? Is it, good for the development of, tourism, development of, work for aviation employs a lot of skilled workers and, well-paid workers. So that's all of those things are, things to think about.
Okay, enough of IATA. Let's get the hat out.
We're gonna do another
next?
one. Okay, yeah, we're gonna
let's go.
shake the hat. All right, let's see who we can get. Any guesses?
Oh, I wouldn't want to speculate. On you go.
All right, here we go. Let's close the eye. We got
Abracadabra. Okay.
Abracadabra.
For anyone that's listening to this or watching us who might be thinking, Abra, what is that? They will have some household names that you probably are familiar with, but you might not necessarily be familiar with Abra as a company. Tell us just a little bit of context around who they are and what they're doing and why they're so relevant, Jay.
Sure. And then also you can, share with everybody who's, speaking at our event. So yeah, Abra is just the name of a holding company. Think of it almost like IAG. We talked about Willie Walsh before, who used to be the head of IAG, which owns British Airways, and they own Iberia, a bunch of different airlines, Aer Lingus, Vueling. So Abra is that sort of holding company. They own Avianca, which is the largest airline in Colombia. And they also own Gol, which is a major airline in Brazil, one of 3 major airlines in Brazil. They've bought recently a small Spanish airline as well, called Wamos, and they're involved in cargo and things like that. They have a loyalty plan, etc. But think of that as a holding company. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on. Some of you, for those listening, for those joining on the LinkedIn call, some of you may have listened to the discussion Gordon and I had last week about LATAM. So we talked about how the South America market is very interesting. There's, some advantages, some of the disadvantages. One of the latter being geographically, it's very remote. Now, Colombia is actually less remote because you're far enough north where you can reach some of these big U.S. markets, including Dallas,
yes,
with narrow body planes that de-risks any network growth in that sense. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what Abra has to say. Now, of course, this is not something that they're going to be talking about in public for obvious reasons, but there are reports. I think the companies themselves even confirmed that Gol and Azul are talking about potentially merging. So that's obviously, going to be very, big on Abra's plate. Now, Gol is undergoing a bankruptcy restructuring right now. So you have to imagine some of the strategic things, maybe they have, and that's one thing that I, be interested in learning at the event is what can they share as far as their vision, what Abra can share as far as their vision on future synergies between Gol and Avianca. Will they largely operate separately? Will there, be, so that's, that's definitely something on my mind with respect to them.
Awesome. And for anyone that's interested, the discussion topic at SAF with Abra is titled Strategic Growth and Innovation in Latin America. And we'll be joined by Abra Group's Chief Commercial Officer, Joe Mohan. And he will be in discussion with our Editor-in-Chief, Sarah Kopitz. Okay, quick one before the podcast break, Jay. Let's take another name out of the hat.
Oh, we're doing another. Okay, number 3. Ready?
Number 3. Let's go for it.
Here we go. Number 3 is going to be, we have here JetBlue.
JetBlue. Okay. So we were going to be speaking to Marty St. George from JetBlue. And yeah, I don't know where to begin. There's so much to discuss with JetBlue. What's top of your mind, Jay?
I'm happy I picked this one because just this morning I was reading through their transcript from their third quarter earnings. So it's all fresh in my mind now. So that's, I got lucky there. JetBlue. Well, we know that JetBlue has been with most of the low cost carriers in the United States, has been going through a very difficult rough spot. I do have the numbers in front of me, if I may. I always like to just give you some context here. JetBlue, in the third quarter, they did have a negative operating margin, slightly. This is excluding special items, but basically negative 0.5%, which is a nice improvement. Interestingly enough, I mean, most of the airlines that have reported in the U.S. so far for the third quarter, they their results were worse this third quarter than last year. But that's not true of JetBlue. They actually made a nice improvement. They actually had about a negative 7% margin last third quarter. So you can see something's going right here. They're moving in the right direction. Now we're still a very, very long distance from the positive 12% they had in the third quarter of 2019. But they're doing, things are kind of moving in the right direction, as I said. And why is that? A few things. And this is something that we'll certainly get into in our weekly newsletter, which we'll publish on Monday. But just to be brief, they are cutting a lot of capacity now. That's one thing. They've moved out of some markets that were underperforming and kind of reallocating them to markets where they feel they have more, kind of underlying strength like New England. And then there's just some sort of macro trends that maybe we'll talk about in the second part that are also kind of lifting all boats, including them as well. I think is helping them.
Got it. So yeah, just a reminder that we will have Marty St. George, JetBlue president, and he will be in discussion at the Skift Aviation Forum on the topic of how are airlines transforming their relationship with travelers. That will be definitely one to follow closely. Jay, don't go anywhere because we've got a very short break. And just a quick reminder, a little bit of housekeeping before we get into that break. If you've got any questions or comments that you have for us, the email address, as always, podcasts@skift.com. That's podcasts with an S. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching us. If you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars, leave us a positive review so we can continue to bring you the Airline Weekly Lounge free of charge, week in, week out. We'll be right back with Jay and myself right after this, discussing more key trends and topics ahead of the Skift Aviation Forum. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. My name is Gordon Smith and I'm joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. How's it going, Jay?
All right. Ready to discuss some more fun airline topics.
Yes. If you're just tuning in, not that that concept is particularly relevant on a podcast, but say you've just come through to halfway for some reason, we are discussing all things Skift Aviation Forum. And we couldn't decide who we wanted to speak to, so Jay's got a super high-tech Met. It's the Mets, isn't it?
It
New
is
York
the
Mets. Yeah. New York Mets cap, which we are drawing names out. So no favoritism, no allegiances anyway. Let's go for another one, Jay. Pick us out of a name, and then we can talk about some of the more macro themes that we'll be coming onto at the forum.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll do the shake here. And
shake.
We've got, let's see here, Southwest.
Okay. Dallas hometown airline.
Yeah, Dallas hometown airline. So we know a lot of drama at Southwest with activist investor that tried to that now owns about, I think it's 11% of the company. Does that sound right? And they were very strenuously criticizing management and really asking for them to replace the CEO and a lot of they really want turn over a new leaf there. They've since kind of came to a compromise, the management team and Elliott, whereas Southwest is going to put some of Elliott's recommended board members on their director board, and then CEO Bob Jordan is going to be keeping his role. But in the interim, while all of this drama is kind of playing out in the background, Southwest unveiled some pretty big changes to their strategy. Back last month, I held a big Investor Day event. And I guess before we can maybe mention some of the changes. But I guess I always do like, as I did for JetBlue, to give some numbers here. And Southwest,
we love your data, Jay.
Data. I've got plenty of that. If you love data, you've come to the right place. So Southwest had a 0.5% positive 0.5% operating margin in the third quarter, which obviously that's not Southwest standards. I mean, they did last year was bad enough, and it was 3%. So now they're down to 0. They've had a lot of let's call it bad luck. I mean, Boeing, they've been one of the airlines most affected by the Boeing MAX delivery delays. Although I had a discussion about this the other day, and someone said, "Well, they're shrinking now, so maybe they're not." You could argue about how badly they want those aircraft, but clearly it's. I mean, I think it's safe. It's fair to say, it's not controversial to say that they would really like to have these maxes because they do a whole lot for their unit cost, and they're not realizing those cost benefits. They're not, maybe they're not growing anymore, but maybe they would be growing if they had lower unit costs. So anyway, they did, they've had some misfortune. They've been exposed to some difficult markets. I mean, the domestic U.S. market has been oversupplied until relatively recently. We'll talk about that in a moment, but they're not exposed to some of these, tremendously strong markets like, Europe, for example, U.S. to Europe transatlantic. They're not exposed really to premium at all, and that's been a booming market, and that's been one of the big changes that they're introducing. They're finally, after all these years, arguably doing it a little bit, later than they should. That's kind of a debate, but the Southwest is finally introducing premium seats. So they're going to be rolling those out, and they're not, don't think of, fancy business class seats or anything, but just they're going to have more leg room, and they'll be able to, monetize that, get some, extra revenue for that. There are other things for sure in their Investor Day event. They're going to, redo their vacation package division. They're going to start red-eye flying. They're going to have a partnership with Icelandair. So there's more than just that. But I'd say the premium seating is, I guess, probably the biggest one of them all.
Got it. Lots more we could discuss. We will have Bob Jordan, the Southwest Airlines president and CEO, discussing the topic here is embracing opportunities in a changing landscape, which sounds pretty apt based on what you just said, Jay. And he will be joining us, of course, at the Skift Aviation Forum. Let's take a big step back now, because we've sort of drilled into a few of the organizations, companies that are going to be at the forum, but there are going to be topics that just transcend everything. Let's take a look at those across the industry, particularly looking into the fall and the winter time. Jay, how are fuel prices looking, just very, very briefly?
Yeah, and that's one, probably the biggest trend of all, because of how important fuel prices are, is that fuel prices are down quite substantially, and that's a big tailwind for the whole industry. It's going to be different by region. Different airlines are going to play depending on where they are in the world. They might be paying this or that tax, or the refining spreads might be different. But in general, everybody's experiencing cheaper costs. I just looked this morning. So the price of crude oil, WTI benchmark is below $70, which is it's kind of a general rule. If you're below 70 nowadays, airlines will be pretty happy with that. Once you start to get into 90, 100, then it's where we were 2 years ago, that gets uncomfortable. So that's a very, very big trend. As we're sitting here in it's almost November of 2024, big trend is that fuel costs are going down.
And what about demand, Jay? Lots to talk about overcapacity, particularly in the US domestic scene. What can you tell us? What are your predictions, trends, forecasts going into the fall, Q4, and potentially into early next year?
Yeah, and before I answer your question, I just want to say that so far it's relatively early in the third quarter earnings season. So we've been getting a lot of updates from we have about 4 or 5 U.S. airlines that are in. The big three: Southwest, JetBlue, and Frontier, I believe. And then we have a few others kind of isolated around there. A few European ones. Lufthansa, actually, I was working on them this morning, so pretty fresh with what's going on there. But we don't have IAG yet. We don't have Air France KLM. We don't really have anything from Asia yet, other than we do have Indigo from India. So it's a little bit of a mix. We're of what how current we are and what we know. Obviously, the fuel situation, we don't need to hear earnings calls to know what's going on there. But as far as demand, the demand situation, to answer your question, seems to be still very good. And the way I kind of characterize it is that so the leisure demand is cooling off from very high levels, but the corporate sort of business kind of stuff is rising a bit. So, do those two things exactly net each other out? Maybe for some airlines it's yes, maybe it's no, but we don't know exactly. But that tends to be the trend. And the premium, the whole big demand for premium seats and premium services, that's still, I haven't heard anybody say that's tailing off. So very much intact, and that's obviously very, very supportive for airlines. Now, don't forget too that we have this big, aircraft supply shortage, which maybe it's that's why demand looks so good, is because supply is so constrained that the revenues are up, and that makes demand look so good. But I think in general, certainly in the U.S., the economy is very good here. In terms of, if you just look at, things like measures like GDP and household wealth, asset prices, things like that, corporate profits, all those things are, lend themselves to an environment in which airline demand and even premium demand will be growing. So that, I think demand situation is good.
Awesome. All right. Good to end on a positive note, Jay. And just give our listeners a little preview of what we can expect in the next issue of Airline Weekly that will be published November 4th, if my calendar math is correct. What's the headline feature story going to be?
Yeah, it'll be on Frontier Airlines. So
nice.
they reported, and there's a lot going on there because they are one of these. Now, we didn't mention it before because I wanted to be global, but in the U.S. specifically, one other big trend right now is that we have a lot of capacity coming out of the market. So Southwest is shrinking, and they're huge, domestic. And you have JetBlue shrinking, you have Spirit shrinking dramatically, I think by about 20% this quarter. So that's kind of lifting, Frontier is getting a nice boost from that, but they still have issues. And we do, by the way, have an excellent, very interesting presentation in Dallas from one of our colleagues, Ashab, who's going to be talking about ultra low cost carriers too. So like it's in the
Awesome.
US. So be sure to, catch that as well. But so Frontier is that. And then of course we have these, reports from the Wall Street Journal that they may be, thinking about, putting the ring back on Spirit's finger. So I don't know if that'll happen or not, but certainly a lot to discuss there.
Absolutely. So we'll have the latest earnings analysis plus Frontier and all the rest. If you want to get involved, go to airlineweekly.com/subscribe. And that's where you can get all the information and get a free sample issue as well to find out what all the fuss is about for our Airline Weekly weekly newsletter. Thank you, Jay. It's been a bit of a novelty having this on LinkedIn Live, being able to see you at the same time as hear you, but really, really enjoyable. Thanks also to producer Monica behind the scenes, keeping things ticking over. And just a reminder of that email address. Got any questions or comments that you might have for us? Podcasts@skift.com. That's podcasts with an S. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Airline Weekly Lounge. And that's a wrap on the podcast. But from an Airline Weekly podcast to LinkedIn Live, Jay, I know we've got a couple of questions that have come in for us now that the podcast is over and we can relax a little bit. Let me bring up one because I've got one that has come in through email to me, and it's actually it's a little bit spicy. I don't know if you how much detail you'll be able to go into this, but it's is Spirit Airlines likely to go bankrupt? What's your take?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I think it's looking more and more like they'll be able to escape that fate, unless that's part of kind of what they do in conjunction with a Frontier merger. I mean, Frontier, sometimes airlines, when they buy another airline, they actually like to buy it out of bankruptcy because they can, restructure the labor contracts and the supplier contracts very easily. So in that sense, I suppose, it is still, very much an option. But at the same time, I think the financial pressures on Spirit, I'd imagine, have to be easing because of those things we just talked about. I mean, they're paying less for fuel. They came out with a sort of an updated investor guidance recently, and they said, their cost cutting plans going better than expected, even non-fuel stuff. The revenue situation has to be better than expected because of, we can hear this as all these airlines are reporting. They're all saying this, and it makes sense because of all this capacity coming out. So I know, I probably it'd be more fun if I give a yes or no forecast, but I'm kind of hedging here. But I think that's, the things to think about. I mean, bankruptcy still might very well be an option. But the pressure to do that, it maybe seems to be lifting a little bit.
Got it. Here we go. We've got a question from someone on LinkedIn, and it says, "Can you give us an update on some of the trends we've been seeing from the European airlines that have reported their results. So a bit of a caveat, Jay, we don't have a huge amount of European airlines reporting just yet. Lufthansa Group, like you said earlier in the week. But maybe we can look at the Q2 numbers and how that might influence Q3, or maybe some of the other mood music that we've been hearing. Give us a little bit of insight, a bit of color on European airlines, if you can.
Sure, and the difference between the European and the U.S. It's going to be, I mean, depending on who you're talking about. If you're talking about like the big three, Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, and IAG, they tend to be more long haul oriented. I mean, they're just their short haul markets are much smaller. And then you have, of course, your lower cost carriers, your Ryanairs, your EasyJets. So, and we haven't really heard too much from them. We did hear from Norwegian, and I think it's the same thing in the sense that demand, I don't think there's too much of a problem. Although, you always have to look airline, but Europe's a little bit more. U.S. is always easier to generalize. If there's a trend that's hitting one airline, it's probably hitting the other. Whereas Europe, it's much more fragmented. So one of the things that Lufthansa is experiencing right now is their Asian markets are really tough, and Finnair actually reported as well, and they said the same thing. And that a lot has to do with still a Russia overflights issue. A lot of the Chinese airlines can fly over Russia, but the European airlines can't.
Someone should write a feature about that, Jay. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I wonder if anyone would ever do that. Yeah.
A shameless plug.
Yeah, Gordon is referring to a great feature that he wrote about this very topic. So be sure to check that out. But yeah, you can see. So that's not going to affect IAG as much, for example, because they don't really have that much exposure to Asia. So there's different trends going on. I think one thing that Norwegian was very clear about is that they have very serious cost issues. Remember that the U.S. dollar has been very strong, and versus a lot of currencies, including the Norwegian currency, including the euro. That's not really a good thing for European airlines because think about it. You're paying for fuel in dollars, you're paying for your aircraft in dollars, you're paying for a lot of things in dollars. So a lot of your supplies and things. So it's I think the European picture is very mixed. The only other thing that I would say about Lufthansa Group specifically is that if you look at all of their airlines are doing extremely well, except for Lufthansa. So it's, as we like to say here, Lufthansa has a Lufthansa problem because Swiss, which they own, fantastic. I mean, they always do great. Austrian had probably its best quarter that I've ever seen this summer. Eurowings, very, very high operating margin. Brussels Airlines did pretty well. So it's Lufthansa itself, and that's if you really want
even Brussels Airlines, which has historically been a little iffy.
Yeah. They had a good quarter, good summer. So and you can read all about why Lufthansa itself, the core Lufthansa brand, is having so many problems. In our issue, we'll certainly go through the details and explain that. But so that's a little bit about Europe.
Thank you, Jay. Just time for one very quick final one. Here we are about low-cost carriers. How will low-cost carriers cutting capacity, I think specifically in the US, we touched on that earlier, affect airfares? It's a great question. Supply and demand economics comes to mind. Can we expect a rise in airfares in the US market? Jay, what's your take?
Well, you have two forces, right? Because you have capacity coming out, so that's going to be put upward pressure on airfares. But then you have fuel going down, that's going to put downward pressure on airfares. So, where that nets out depends on individual markets. It's just very, very difficult to say because of that dynamic. When fuel comes down, you can be sure that airlines are going to be, use that opportunity to, maybe poaching market share might not be the wrong word. They would never use that term, but they, around, hey, let's go compete with these guys over on the Dallas route because, fuel is cheap. Whereas maybe if fuel is $20, more expensive per gallon than $20, per crude oil, or $20 per barrel more expensive, they wouldn't do that. So it's a very tough, I'm not giving any straight answers today, am I, Gordon?
Oh, plenty of straight answers, Jay.
I'm dancing around all these questions.
It's a very complex topic.
It's complex. Yeah, that's my excuse.
It is. For full detailed analysis, read the Airline Weekly issue. How about that?
There you go.
There we go. Thank you, Jay. Really appreciate your additional insight there. And thank you to anyone that submitted a question. Sorry we weren't able to get through them all. But quick reminder, live.skift.com if you want to join us at the Skift Aviation Forum 2024 in Dallas. That's on November 12th. Jay will be there. I'll be there for more information and how to register. That address again, live.skift.com. We'll also be joined by Ashab from our research team and Meghna, airlines reporter at Skift, plus a lot of other members from the wider Skift team. I'm really, really excited. Jay, are you excited?
I am, very much. Looking forward to going back to Dallas too. Dallas is, it's always fun time.
Awesome. Thanks again. A quick reminder, airlineweekly.com if you want any further information or context around what we're doing with the weekly newsletter. And we will see you in Dallas on the 12th of November. And we will look forward to you joining us on the Airline Weekly podcast next week for another non-LinkedIn Live, rather traditional audio-only edition. Take care. Bye for now.